Namaste, welcome back to Mindful Surrender Yoga, or Waking Up in a Peaceful World, whatever site you're tapping into. And we are going to continue with the answering of questions from the Soulful Jar, or the Jar of Soulful Questions, answered by someone who knows nothing about anything. Okay. I'm going to reach in and pull out a question. Again, I answer these questions, or attempt to answer them within a 10-minute time frame. And I'm just going to make sure okay. Again, another toughie. My timer kind of went on me. Just give me a second here. Gonna probably have a sneeze too. Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm going to start the timer, and then I'll read the question. How do we approach the suffering that turns violently against others? How do we approach the suffering that turns violently against others? I'm going to take a nice deep breath. I'm not sure where this question came from, but it really applies to something I'm dealing with right now. How do we approach the suffering that turns violently against others? I know that what we have a tendency to do in society is look at the violent offender as somebody out there. We judge very harshly. We put up our extra protection against us and them. We push away. We lock away. We punish. We tend to either punish them through the legal system or punish them socially by ostracizing them, by making a big distinction between us and them. Yeah. That's what we do with violent offenders. Now, anytime there is violence directed towards us or those people we love, or anyone, if we're witnessing it, we do need to protect ourselves against it. Being someone who turns the other cheek, as just Jesus said, does not mean stepping in front of a violent offender and taking a hit just because that's what you think you're supposed to do. We do need to protect ourselves against any type of violence, be it verbal, physical, sexual, financial. There's so many different forms of violence that we can see perpetrated against other human beings on this planet, even against other beings on this planet. But when we see violence towards others, we first of all need to do what the 3 B's that I always talk about. Step back. Most often that stepping back is mental back. Just creating distance between us and what we're observing. Taking a breath, because the breath anchors us to the present moment and allows us to see clearly what's going on, so we can look deeply into the situation. And then we begin again. We approach it with, not with the ego reactivity, but with our higher and deeper level of response mode, is what we do when we see a violent offender or are dealing with a violent offender. We have to do what's really hard for us to do as human beings, and that puts away our judging tendency. Our this, you're bad, you're over there, I'm good, I'm over here. Keep the distance. We have to realize that that violent offender is just acting out something that we all have within us. That sense of anger, that sense of ill will, that sense of aggression, that sense of blaming. The violent offender is just suffering, and their suffering is being, instead of perpetrated against the self, it's perpetrated against others. They are projecting their pain outward. So any offender is actually someone who is suffering. And when we suffer, we tend to either turn it inward or project it outward. In this case of violence, it's projected outward. We fail to see, though, when we look at a violent offender, the suffering. It's just something they're doing wrong, or they themselves are evil or bad or whatever. We do not see that human tendency within all of us, within ourselves. And one of the reasons why we're so harsh on the violent offender is that we do not want to see that shadow self, as Jung called it. within ourselves, that part of us, the seeds that we all have within us in what Thich Nhat Hanh would call store consciousness, the basement of our consciousness. Seeds that not only have things for compassion and love and caring, but also have that anger, that ill will, that aversion, that tendency towards blame, tendency towards projecting outward our pain. We all have that in us. And we are just witnessing in the violent offender. And I think the reason why we react, not only because we need to create safety and protect ourselves, which we do, but it's more, I think, about protecting our psyches from this idea that we are different from them, that we don't have those negative seeds within us. We do not like to look at our within our stored consciousness and see who we really are as human beings. We tend to disown those parts of ourselves that are not nice, that are not pleasant to look at. We don't want to see them ourselves. We don't want other people to see them in us, so we disown them. And when we disown them, what we tend to do is be even more acutely aware of those tendencies in other human beings. And we tend to look at those other human beings and see that what they are doing is wrong, instead of seeing it as a human tendency that we all have the propensity for. Hopefully not many of us act out violently with our anger, but it's a possibility that we all can, because we all have that anger, those seeds of anger within us. Just the violent person has watered those seeds over the seeds for compassion and patience and whatnot. But we all have those seeds within us. So one of the reasons why we have such a hard time accepting the violent offender and looking at them with eyes of compassion is because we want to disown those parts within ourselves that they may somehow be emulating in their own behavior. I know that's hard to accept. Of course, like I said, it's violence. So whatever type of violence is, we do not have to be victims to violence. We do not have to endure violence. We need to get out of violent situations and, and heal from them. But in the meantime, what we really need to do too is, when we look at a society that is full of violence, we need to be aware that what we're seeing is suffering. What we are seeing is not evil. We're just seeing suffering that is directed outward rather than inward. And any type of suffering we have to have, I believe, a certain degree of compassion for. Presently in a situation personally where there has been violence and there has been a need for protection, and there has been some severe consequences for the person who perpetuated the violence. Not anything I would ever ask for this person, but it was taken out of the hands of the people that are involved in this, and this person is going to be receiving severe consequences for their violence. Now, most people will look at me, and say, oh my gosh, and they talk about the situation, they'll say, this person was so bad, this person is so evil, this person's crazy. And I do not see that. I see a person who is hurting, a person who is suffering to a great degree, and a person who needs help and healing, and a person probably more so than anybody else, even the victim in the situation, needs compassion. Because I believe it is a lack of compassion, be it self-compassion or compassion coming from others, that has led to this particular situation, led to this projection of ill will outward. To the point where it became violent. We do, someone said, well, how do we deal with the violence offenders? How do we deal with people who act out violently? I think we need to get to the roots of all suffering, and violence is just an indication that there is suffering. Get to the roots of the suffering, understanding where that person is coming from, what they've endured, that they need healing. We also need to prevent violence in the first place by allowing people to see that they have those tendencies within them, and how to avoid watering them, how to get the compassion and the love they need from the world, as well as from themselves, most importantly, because it's a lack of self-compassion, I believe, more than anything else, so that they can water the seeds of compassion, water the seeds of love, water the seeds of acceptance, and water the seeds of a sense of worthiness, water the seeds of other ways of, and develop the skills that help them deal with those unpleasant emotions that we all have inside us in healthier ways. So we need to start young with our children. We need to break the cycles of violence in violent families, and families where there's domestic violence. In intimate partner violence, we have to be mindful of the consequences for both, and start working at healing not only the individual who was abused, but the individual who is abusing. We have to stop looking at them as if they're monsters that belong outside of society, because they are just representations of those seeds that we all have within us. And the less we resist them and project our own judgment outward onto these individuals, the more we will realize that we have those seeds. The more we'll look deeply within ourselves and deal with the seeds that could eventually grow into something we don't want them to grow into. And instead, being mindful, being aware of our tendencies, we can start watering the seeds that we do want to place them, like compassion and love for all human beings, regardless of what they do. One axiom I've taught my kids from the time they were small was that do not judge people for what they do, judge them for who they are. And we seldom know who people are unless we look beyond their actions, their thoughts and their words, to the suffering that may be there. Well, that's all I have to say for now. I hope that helps. Namaste. Have a wonderful day.